A dim room, papers stacked. A signature line sits empty. The biggest lie ever told about Afrobeats is that the people on stage were the ones in control. While artists fought radio bans, street politics, and public rejection, there were men in rooms you never saw. Shaping contracts, building pipelines, moving records across borders before the world was ready to listen. They weren't famous. They weren't celebrated. Some of them never wanted their names mentioned at all. But without them, Afrobeats wouldn't have survived the 2000s, let alone conquered the world. This is not a story about stars. This is the story of the architects who built Afrobeats from the shadows. Early 2000s, Lagos. Nigeria had musicians everywhere, studios on every street, talent spilling from every corner. But talent doesn't build movements. Talent creates moments. Infrastructure creates movements. And Nigeria had none. No distribution networks, no international pipelines, no protection for intellectual property, no framework for global expansion. Artists recorded songs, released them, hoped. Most disappeared within months. The problem no one talked about. Everyone focused on the artists, but artists were replaceable. One artist falls, another rises. The cycle continues. The real question wasn't about talent, it was about systems. Who would build the roads? Who would negotiate the borders? Who would create the structures that allowed Afrobeats to exist beyond a single hit? The silent shift. While artists fought public wars, other battles happened in private. Conference rooms, airport terminals, late-night phone calls across time zones. Men making decisions no one filmed. Signing documents no one photographed. Building pathways no one celebrated. You never saw them, but they were there. Watching the chaos, understanding the patterns, identifying the gaps. The realization. By 2005, something became clear to a small group of people. Afrobeats would either professionalize or die. The war needed to end. The structure needed to begin. Artists couldn't do it alone. They were too busy surviving. Someone else had to build. The camera focuses on an unsigned contract. If artists weren't in control, who was? The four archetypes. Four types of men emerged, not heroes, not villains, builders. Each understood a different piece of the puzzle. The strategist, label executives, show promoters, career architects. One strategist saw the pattern early. Artists burned bright and fast, 6 months of relevance. Then silence. He changed the model. He built multi-year plans, controlled release schedules, managed public perception like product launches. His artists didn't peak and crash, they sustained. Radio called him controlling, artists called him demanding. The industry called him necessary. He didn't care what they called him, he cared about legacy. The connector. Diaspora middlemen, DJs, international A&Rs. One connector lived between worlds. Nigerian blood, British passport, American network. He understood code switching, cultural translation, market positioning. He took Nigerian artists and made them legible to Western infrastructure. Not by changing the sound, by changing the language around it. He knew which doors to knock on, which hands to shake, which rooms to enter. When major labels finally paid attention to Afrobeats, they called him first. You never saw him, but every international deal passed through him. The financier, risk takers, silent backers, money with patience. One financier invested when no one else would, not in singles, in catalogs, not in moments, in careers. He funded studio time when artists were broke, covered music video costs when labels refused, financed international travel when opportunities appeared. He didn't take credit. He took percentages. Years later, when those artists became superstars, he quietly collected generational wealth built on early belief. Artists resented him sometimes, called him predatory, but they called him when they needed money. The question: not all who built sought to uplift. Some saw opportunity where others saw culture, the shadow. But not every architect built to protect the culture. There was another type, rarely discussed, never filmed. Men who saw Afrobeats as extraction, not investment. Who built systems designed to drain, not develop. One architect operated this way, signed young artists, promising futures, then buried them in clauses that guaranteed poverty. He's still operating, still signing, still extracting. His name won't appear here. But his model infected the industry. The gatebreaker. Media insiders, radio disruptors, access creators. One gatebreaker worked inside the system to break the system. He was a radio programmer who hated payola culture. So he created a different model. He built relationships with independent promoters, developed rotation strategies that bypassed traditional gatekeepers, created playlists that laundered street music into mainstream formats. Artists who couldn't get airplay through normal channels found alternative routes. Through him. He didn't destroy the gates, he built doors beside them. The pressure. These men operated under conditions artists never understood. They risked money with no guarantee, built systems with no blueprint, negotiated deals in hostile environments. Many were disliked, some were feared, most were ignored. But they kept building. The truth: Afrobeats wasn't fighting for popularity, it was fighting for survival. Artists fought visible wars. Architects fought invisible ones. Both were necessary. The contract. One architect sat across from a 19-year-old artist, talented, hungry, naive. The contract was 30 pages long. The artist read the first page. Standard industry terms, the architect said. The artist signed. 5 years later, that artist had 3 platinum albums, sold-out tours, international recognition, and owned nothing. Masters, label, publishing, split 4 ways. Touring revenue, 7 people taking percentages. The artist was famous, the architect was wealthy. Control versus creativity. Another architect managed 3 artists simultaneously. Different sounds, different images, different audiences. But the same systems. He controlled their release dates, their collaboration choices, their public statements, their personal relationships. One artist wanted to speak on politics. The architect said no, bad for brand. Another artist wanted creative freedom. The architect said later, not yet. The third artist wanted to fire him. The architect reminded him of the contract. All 3 stayed. Who really benefited? By 2008, Afrobeats was growing, international interest increasing, money flowing. But where was it flowing? Artists saw some. Architects saw more. One architect structured deals where the artist got exposure, he got ownership. The artist got fame, he got equity. The artist's face on billboards, his name in contracts. Fair? Unfair? The question didn't matter. It was the only game available. The moral complexity. These architects weren't stealing, they were investing. They took risks when no one else would. Built infrastructure when artists couldn't. Created opportunities that didn't previously exist. But they also extracted value. Controlled futures. Limited options. One architect genuinely loved the culture, genuinely wanted Afrobeats to succeed. He also made millions from artists who stayed broke. Both things were true. The moral question, fair or unfair, didn't matter. It was the only door open. A platinum plaque hangs on a wall, the artist's name in large letters. Below it, in fine print, 4 other names. You never noticed them before. While headlines called it an overnight success, these decisions were 15 years in the making. Drake featured a Nigerian artist. Beyoncé sampled Afrobeats. Major festivals added African acts. The world didn't discover Afrobeats. It finally caught up to decisions made years earlier. The infrastructure was already there. Distribution networks built. International relationships established. Touring circuits operational. Media connections active. When the world finally turned its attention to Afrobeats, the architecture was waiting. One architect had spent 7 years building relationships with UK promoters. When Afrobeats went global, he had venues on standby. Another had cultivated streaming playlist curators since 2013. When the moment arrived, his artists appeared on every major playlist. A third had negotiated pre-agreements with international labels. When demand spiked, contracts were ready. It looked sudden. To outsiders, Afrobeats appeared from nowhere. To architects, it was the culmination of 15 years of groundwork. The explosion was visible, the preparation was not. The irony. The world celebrated the artists, photographers chased them, journalists interviewed them, awards crowned them. The architects watched from offices, boardrooms, hotel suites during negotiations. One architect attended a major award show. His artist won 3 awards, gave 3 speeches, thanked everyone. Never mentioned the architect's name. The architect didn't mind. He'd already been paid. The quiet triumph. This isn't celebration, it's observation. The architects achieved something rare. They built a global movement from a marginalized position. No major label backing initially. No Western infrastructure support. No international media attention. Just vision, strategy, patience, pressure. They proved something. Infrastructure beats inspiration. Systems outlast stars. The cost. But success revealed new problems. As Afrobeats grew, more architects entered, more systems emerged. Competition intensified. The early architects who built from nothing now fought to maintain control. New artists had more options, more leverage, more information. The power dynamic was shifting, but the architecture remained. Recognition versus legacy. One architect built 20 careers, shaped the sound of a generation, made millions. But when documentaries were made about Afrobeats, his name appeared once, in small text, for 3 seconds. He watched the documentary alone, smiled, turned it off. The invisibility tax. Power that works best works invisibly. The moment architects became famous, their power diminished. Celebrity meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant limitation. So most stayed hidden, by choice, by necessity. One architect was interviewed once, early in his career. He spoke freely about his strategies, his methods, his influence. Within months, competitors copied his model. Artists demanded better terms. The industry adapted. He never gave another interview. The architects who left. Some architects cashed out, built their systems, made their money, sold their catalogs, retired quietly. One architect at 45 walked away completely. bought a house outside Lagos, disconnected. He'd built 3 labels, launched 15 careers, shaped the industry, and decided he was done extracting from artists. No announcement, no farewell, just absence. Years later, artists still called him. He never answered. The architects who stayed. Others couldn't leave. The architecture became their identity. One architect in his 60s still works, still negotiates, still builds. Not for money anymore, for legacy, for proof, for the thing only architects understand. Buildings outlast builders, but someone has to keep building. The uncomfortable truth. Every global movement has heroes, faces, voices, stories. Afrobeats also had architects, and most of them were never meant to be seen. Not because they were hiding, because that's how architecture. The final thought. The camera lingers on an empty office. Awards on shelves, contracts in filing cabinets, photos on walls. In every photo, the architect is standing to the side, never center frame. Always present, never prominent. This is the choice architects make. Influence without recognition. Power without credit. Impact without visibility. Some call it sacrifice, others call it strategy. Both are true. Afrobeat succeeded because someone decided it would. Not through passion alone, through systems. Not through hope, through architecture. The world sees the stars. History should remember the builders.